First contact. The vast darkness of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the twinkling of distant stars and the imposing silhouettes of the galactic hegemony's warships. These massive vessels dwarfed the approaching human fleet, their hulls gleaming with purple-black metal that absorbed rather than reflected light. Admiral Paul Green stood on the bridge of the UES Intrepid, his weathered face illuminated by holographic displays. He straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. This was humanity's first official contact with the ruling power of this sector of the galaxy. Everything depended on making the right impression. "Signal from the Hegemony flagship, sir," reported Lieutenant Kate Murphy from her communication station. Her fingers danced across the interface as she decoded the incoming transmission. "They're inviting us to dock for face-to-face negotiations." Green nodded. "Accept their invitation and inform Earth Command we're proceeding as planned." The Intrepid broke formation, gliding toward the enormous Hegemony command ship. From certain angles, the human vessel looked like little more than a toy beside the alien behemoth. Inside the Hegemony flagship, Supreme Commander Zolther of the Valkyrian species watched the approaching human ship with 4 golden eyes that blinked in sequence. His scaled skin rippled with amusement. "Such a tiny vessel," he commented to his second-in-command. "I've seen pleasure craft with more impressive armaments." "The entire human fleet consists of only 17 ships," Supreme Commander reported the officer. "Our scanners detect minimal weapons systems and outdated shield technology." Zolther's mouthparts clicked together in what passed for laughter among his kind. "And they dare to approach us as equals. How charming." When Admiral Green and his small delegation stepped through the airlock into the Hegemony ship, they were immediately struck by the scale of everything. The ceilings towered 20 feet high, the corridors wide enough for 10 humans to walk abreast. The message was clear. The Hegemony was bigger, stronger, more advanced. The Valkyrians stood nearly 8 feet tall, their slender bodies covered in iridescent scales. They looked down at the humans physically, and Green quickly realized, metaphorically as well. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," Zolther said through a translation device. "We are pleased you have finally achieved the minimal technology required for interstellar travel. Your species shows potential." Green maintained a polite smile. "On behalf of the United Earth Government, we thank you for this opportunity to establish diplomatic relations." A ripple of clicking sounds passed through the Valkyrian delegation. Lieutenant Murphy leaned slightly toward Green and whispered, "Sir, I believe they're laughing at us." The Admiral gave a barely perceptible nod, but maintained his diplomatic demeanor. Supreme Commander Zolther gestured toward a large chamber. "Please, join us for the formal meeting. We have much to discuss regarding your species' place in the galactic community." The meeting room featured a massive table with seats designed for various alien physiologies. The humans were directed to the smallest chairs at the far end of the table. As presentations began, the Hegemony representative displayed a map of their territory, thousands of star systems spanning multiple spiral arms of the galaxy. Earth appeared as a tiny blinking dot at the very edge. "The Hegemony offers protection to developing species," Zolther explained. "You would benefit from our guidance and security. In return, we require only minimal resource tributes and compliance with Hegemony directives." Green listened carefully. The terms being offered weren't those of allies, but of vassal and master. "With respect, Supreme Commander," Green replied, "Earth seeks equal membership, not protected status. We bring unique perspectives and technologies that could benefit all species in the galaxy." Zolther's scales rippled again with that unsettling laughter. "Your confidence is admirable, if misplaced. Your tiny fleet would not survive a day without our protection. The galaxy is filled with dangers your species cannot imagine." Lieutenant Murphy noticed several Valkyrian officers exchanging amused glances. They clearly didn't consider humans to be worthy opponents or partners. Green remained composed. "We request time to consult with our government regarding your generous offer." "Of course," Zolther said with obvious condescension. "Take all the time you need. The hegemony has existed for 10,000 years. We are patient with developing species. As the humans returned to their ship, Murphy couldn't contain her frustration. They're treating us like children, sir. Green's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. Let them underestimate us, Lieutenant. It may be the only advantage we have. The gathering storm. The Grand Council chamber of the galactic hegemony buzzed with agitation. Dozens of alien species filled the tiered seating, their attention focused on Supreme Commander Zolthir as he addressed the gathering. These humans are surprisingly stubborn, Zolthir said, his scales shifting to a shade of irritated orange. They refuse our generous offer of protection status. A representative from the jellyfish-like Quarians floated forward. Are they truly a threat? Their ships are so few. Not a threat, Zolthir clicked dismissively. Merely an annoyance. Their refusal sets a poor example for other developing species. In a smaller chamber nearby, Earth's ambassador Lisa Dawson waited with Intelligence Officer John Bell. Though officially here for diplomatic talks, they both knew their real purpose was to gather information. They're deliberately keeping us waiting, Dawson muttered, adjusting her formal diplomatic uniform. Another power play. Bell nodded, his eyes constantly scanning the room for surveillance devices. While we wait, I've been analyzing their network security. It's impressive but overconfident. Find anything useful? Bell lowered his voice. The hegemony has integrated 27 species in the last century alone. Each one began as a protected world. Dawson's expression hardened. And how many gained full membership status? None, Bell replied. Once you're a protectorate, you stay that way forever. Their conversation halted as a Valkyrian aide entered to escort them to the council. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Defiant, Captain Ryan Kelly received an encrypted transmission from Earth Command. He entered his private quarters to review the message, his face growing increasingly serious as he read. Project Thunderbolt authorization confirmed, the message concluded. Prepare for possible hostile engagement. Kelly immediately called his senior officers to the briefing room. Ladies and gentlemen, we may be heading into conflict sooner than expected. Begin battle preparations, but keep everything discreet. We don't want the hegemony to realize what we're doing. His executive officer raised an eyebrow. They already think our ships are primitive toys, sir. I doubt they're watching us closely. Let's keep it that way, Kelly replied with a grim smile. Back in the Hegemony Council chamber, Ambassador Dawson stood before the assembled aliens, maintaining her diplomatic composure despite the patronizing attitudes directed her way. Earth appreciates your interest in our development, she stated firmly. However, we seek alliance, not protection. We believe we can contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. Laughter rippled through the chamber. A reptilian counselor leaned forward. Your species has barely mastered basic interstellar travel. What could you possibly contribute? Dawson smiled. Perhaps we might surprise you. As the diplomatic discussions grew increasingly tense, Intelligence Officer Bell discreetly placed tiny devices in various locations throughout the hegemony complex. These undetectable sensors would provide Earth with valuable information about hegemony capabilities and intentions. On the third day of negotiations, Supreme Commander Zolthir's patience finally ran out. He summoned Dawson to his private chambers, towering over her as he delivered the hegemony's final decision. Your continued resistance is futile and frankly tiresome, he said. The hegemony has decided. Earth will accept protected status, or we will demonstrate why so many species have wisely chosen our guidance over independence. Dawson maintained her calm. Are you threatening Earth, Supreme Commander? I am informing you of reality, Zolthir replied coldly. Your tiny fleet cannot stand against even a fraction of our power. We could crush your primitive vessels without noticing the effort. I must consult with my government, Dawson said. You have 48 hours, Zolthir declared. After that, the hegemony will take appropriate action to secure this sector, with or without Earth's cooperation. As Dawson returned to her quarters, she contacted Captain Kelly on a secure channel. "It's happening," she reported. "They've issued an ultimatum." Kelly nodded solemnly. "We're ready. The fleet has already implemented the first phase of Thunderbolt protocols." "They have no idea what they're about to face, do they?" Dawson asked. "No," Kelly replied, a hint of steel in his voice. "And that's exactly how we want it." The first strike. The red dust of Mars swirled around the colony domes as sirens wailed through the settlement. Overhead, the sky darkened with the massive shapes of hegemony warships. "This is not a drill." Commander Susan Blackwell's voice echoed through the colony's communication system. "All civilians proceed to emergency shelters immediately." This is not a drill. The hegemony had made good on their threat. When Earth refused to accept protectorate status, the aliens decided a demonstration was needed. Mars colony, with its 5,000 inhabitants, made a perfect target. Important enough to hurt, but far enough from Earth to give humans time to reconsider their foolish stance. Inside the colony's operations center, Blackwell coordinated the evacuation. "Status report," she demanded. 87% of civilians in shelters," reported her assistant. "Hegemony ships are holding position in high orbit. They're hailing us." Blackwell nodded grimly. "Put them through." A Valkyrian officer appeared on the main screen, scales glittering with self-satisfaction. "Attention Mars colony. This is Commander Vex of the Galactic Hegemony. We will demonstrate our power by destroying one uninhabited dome. Consider this a merciful warning. Resistances." Blackwell cut the transmission. "Continue evacuation and alert the defense fleet." In orbit around Earth's moon, Captain Ryan Kelly received the emergency signal. "The hegemony is attacking Mars," he informed his bridge crew. "Operation Thunderbolt is now active." He opened a channel to Chief Engineer Alan Foster. "Alan, it's time. Are the modifications ready?" Deep in the engine room, Foster wiped grease from his hands. "Ready, Captain. The Moduloc systems are fully operational. The hegemony has no idea what these ships can really do." Kelly nodded. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump to Mars. Combat configuration Charlie." 17 human ships accelerated away from lunar orbit, their engines glowing blue against the blackness of space. To ordinary eyes, they still looked small and unimpressive compared to hegemony vessels. At Mars, the hegemony warships positioned themselves to fire on an evacuated dome. Commander Vex watched with mild interest. This primitive colony would learn a valuable lesson today. "Energy weapons charge," reported his weapons officer. "Target locked." "Fire," Vex ordered casually. Brilliant green energy lanced down from the hegemony ship, vaporizing the empty dome in seconds. Vex nodded with satisfaction. "Now, open a channel to Earth. Let's see if they're ready to be reasonable." "Sir," interrupted his sensor officer, voice suddenly urgent. "Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Ships approaching." Vex looked annoyed. "More human vessels." "How many?" 17 ships, Commander." Vex laughed. "Their entire fleet, coming to witness our power firsthand." "Very well." The human ships emerged from hyperspace, arranging themselves in an unusual formation. Vex watched with mild curiosity as they seemed to draw closer to each other. "What are they doing?" he wondered aloud. On the UES Defiant, Kelly gave the order. "Execute Thunderbolt protocol." The 17 human ships moved with perfect precision. Mechanical arms extended from their hulls. Connection points locked together with magnetic precision. What had been separate vessels began to transform, joining into larger configurations. "What is happening?" Vex demanded, standing up from his command chair. 3 larger vessels now faced the hegemony fleet, having combined from the 17 smaller ships. Their weapons ports glowed with energy as hidden systems came online. "Impossible," whispered Vex. "Their technology is primitive." The largest combined human vessel opened a communication channel. Kelly's face appeared on the hegemony screen. "This is Captain Ryan Kelly of Earth Defense Force. You have committed an act of war against a human settlement." Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Vex recovered his composure. Your parlor tricks do not impress us, human. Even combined, your vessels are no match for hegemony warships. Kelly's expression remained calm. You were warned. The human ships moved with startling speed, their weapons firing with pinpoint accuracy. The first volley disabled the hegemony flagship's main weapons array, while the second crippled its engines. As alarms blared throughout his ship, Vex stared in disbelief. The humans' tiny fleet had just outmaneuvered the finest vessels in the hegemony. Retreat, he ordered, his scales pale with shock. Return to hegemony space immediately. As the hegemony ships limped away, Kelly contacted Earth. First engagement complete. The enemy is retreating. They won't underestimate us again. The revelation. The Hegemony War Council erupted in chaos. Supreme Commander Zolthir pounded his four-fingered hand against the table, his scales flashing angry red patterns. Impossible, he roared. How could primitive human vessels defeat our warships? Commander Vex stood before the council, his posture submissive after his humiliating retreat from Mars. The human ships, they changed. Supreme Commander. They combined into larger configurations with capabilities our sensors didn't detect initially. Zolthir's eyes narrowed. You were deceived by a simple trick. It was no trick, Vex insisted. Their technology is far more advanced than we assumed. Their ships contain modular systems that can reconfigure during battle. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of the Mars system, the human fleet maintained defensive positions. The bridge of the UES Defiant buzzed with focused activity as Captain Kelly reviewed the battle data. The hegemony will return with greater numbers, he told his officers. We need to be ready. Lieutenant George Martinez, the fleet's tactical officer, brought up a holographic display showing 17 human ships in various configurations. Captain, I recommend we implement Swarm Pattern Delta for the next engagement. Kelly studied the display and nodded. Explain it to the other captains. Martinez activated the fleet-wide tactical channel. The hegemony relies on massive ships with powerful but slow targeting weapon systems. Our advantage is speed and coordination. He demonstrated with a hologram, showing human vessels breaking formation, attacking from multiple vectors, then rejoining into combined units before separating again. They expect us to fight like they do. We won't. In another section of the Defiant, Lieutenant Olivia Park hunched over her communications array, her face illuminated by screens displaying intercepted hegemony transmissions. Captain, she called over the comm. I'm picking up significant chatter from Hegemony Command. They're mobilizing their second fleet, over 200 warships. Kelly's expression remained calm. How long until they arrive? Approximately 18 hours, sir. Then we have time to prepare our surprise, Kelly replied. 16 hours later, the space around Mars shimmered as the massive Hegemony Armada arrived. Their warships formed a perfect attack formation, a wall of firepower that no rational enemy would challenge. Fleet Admiral Crix of the Hegemony Second Fleet observed the tiny human vessels on his view screen. These are the ships that defeated Vex. Pathetic. All vessels, prepare to fire on my command. Before he could give the order, the human ships burst into action. Instead of forming larger units as expected, they split into smaller components, some barely larger than fighter craft. What is this? Crix demanded. Target the largest vessels first. Sir, his weapons officer replied, confusion in her voice. They're all moving too quickly. Our targeting systems can't lock onto them. The human vessels executed Martinez's swarm pattern to perfection. They darted between the massive hegemony ships, attacking with precision strikes against weapons arrays, engine exhausts, and sensor nodes. They're targeting our critical systems, shouted Crix's second-in-command. How do they know exactly where to strike? On the smallest human craft, Martinez directed the swarm attack personally. Focus on their primary fire control systems, he ordered. Without them, their weapons are useless. The hegemony ships fired wildly, their massive energy weapons designed to destroy large vessels, not the nimble human craft that flew between them. Some hegemony shots even struck their own ships in the confusion. Lieutenant Park continued monitoring enemy communications. "They're panicking, Captain," she reported to Kelly. "Their command structure is breaking down." Kelly nodded. "Now for Phase 2. All ships recombine into Thunderbolt formation." The human vessels rejoined with astonishing speed, forming 3 massive battle platforms that dwarfed even the largest hegemony cruisers. Hidden weapons ports opened across their hulls. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Crix as the human ships unveiled their true power. The combined human vessels fired simultaneously. Advanced shield technology that had been completely concealed during first contact now glowed blue around the human ships as they launched their assault. "Retreat," ordered Crix, his voice shaking. "All ships retreat immediately." As the hegemony fleet fled in disarray, Kelly opened a channel to Earth Command. Phase 1 successful. The hegemony now understands we are not to be underestimated. The message that traveled back to hegemony space was clear. The tiny human fleet was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The counter-offensive. The mood aboard the Earth Defense Force Command Station had shifted dramatically. What began as a desperate defense now transformed into something new. A counter-offensive. Admiral Paul Green stood before a holographic map displaying dozens of hegemony outposts and colonies across the nearby sectors of space. Red dots marked military installations, while blue indicated subjugated worlds. "Operation Wildfire begins today," Green announced to the assembled commanders. "The hegemony believes they can retreat, regroup, and crush us with overwhelming numbers. We won't give them that chance." Captain Kelly raised a question from the front row. "Sir, even with our modular capabilities, we're still outnumbered hundreds to 1. How do we strike at so many targets?" Green smiled and nodded to a woman in a science division uniform. "Dr. Nancy Rivera will explain." Dr. Rivera stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She activated a handheld device, and a small metallic sphere appeared above her palm, floating and glowing with a soft blue light. "This is our new advantage," she explained. "Combat nanites. Microscopic machines that can disable hegemony systems without destroying their ships or killing their crews." The sphere expanded into a cloud of tiny sparkling particles. One canister contains billions of nanites. They can penetrate hegemony shields, disable weapons, and temporarily paralyze electronic systems. The assembled officers watched with fascination as the demonstration showed simulated nanites neutralizing a hegemony dreadnought. "We don't need to destroy their ships," Rivera continued. "We just need to render them harmless." Green took over again. "Our first targets will be these military outposts near the borders of hegemony space. Captain William Frost will lead the strike force." Frost stood up, his weathered face serious. "My team will hit 7 targets in rapid succession. The hegemony won't know where we'll strike next." The briefing concluded, and the officers dispersed to prepare their crews. As they left, Dr. Rivera approached Captain Kelly with a concerned expression. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "While developing the nanites, we intercepted communications from various worlds under hegemony control. Many of them hate their overlords and have been fighting resistance campaigns for decades." Kelly nodded slowly. "Potential allies." "More than that," Rivera replied. "They've been watching our confrontation with the hegemony closely. If we succeed, we might trigger a wave of rebellions across hegemony space." 3 days later, Captain Frost's strike force emerged from hyperspace near a hegemony military outpost in the Deneb system. The facility served as a forward base for subjugating nearby worlds. "Deploy nanite canisters," Frost ordered calmly. "Target their defense grid first." The human ships released clouds of the microscopic machines, which swarmed toward the hegemony installation. Within minutes, warning lights flashed across the enemy base as systems began failing. "Their weapons are offline," reported Frost's tactical officer. shields down. Communications disrupted. Frost opened a channel to the confused hegemony commanders. Attention hegemony forces. Your facility is now under our control. You have 10 minutes to evacuate your personnel before we take possession. The hegemony soldiers, seeing their advanced technology rendered useless, quickly evacuated to escape shuttles. As they fled, Frost's team downloaded the outpost's database, revealing locations of prison camps on nearby worlds. Next target, Frost commanded once the data was secured. The human ships reconfigured into their fastest formation and jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a disabled hegemony base. Over the next week, Operation Wildfire spread across hegemony border regions. Captain Frost's team liberated 3 subjugated planets, while other human strike forces disabled 17 military installations. On the planet Viridian, a race of blue-skinned humanoids watched in amazement as their hegemony overseers fled from approaching human ships. They said humans were primitive, whispered a Viridian elder to his people. But look, they've accomplished in days what our resistance couldn't do in centuries. Meanwhile, in the Hegemony Central Council, panic was setting in. Supreme Commander Zalthir faced angry representatives from dozens of species. How can such a small fleet strike everywhere at once? Demanded a counselor. Zalthir's scales had faded to a pale, sickly color. They're not fighting like any species we've encountered before, and now reports indicate rebellions on 7 worlds, inspired by human actions. For the first time in 1,000 years, the mighty hegemony faced an enemy they couldn't simply overwhelm with brute force. The humans' tiny fleet had become their worst nightmare. The final confrontation. The vast space surrounding the hegemony homeworld glittered with thousands of warships. Every available vessel had been recalled from across their territory to form the Grand Armada, the largest military force assembled in the galaxy's history. Supreme Commander Zalthir stood on the command platform of his flagship, surveying the holographic display of his forces. His scales had regained their confident purple hue as he addressed the assembled fleet commanders. "The humans have been fortunate so far," he declared. "Their tricks worked against scattered outposts and border patrols. But now they face the full might of the hegemony. Their tiny fleet will be crushed." A junior officer approached nervously. "Supreme Commander, our long-range sensors have detected human ships entering the outer system." Zalthir's mouthparts clicked in anticipation. "How many vessels?" "Just 17, Supreme Commander." "The same fleet as before." Laughter rippled through the command center. Zalthir gestured dismissively. "They dare challenge us here, at the heart of our power, with the same handful of ships. Their arrogance will be their downfall." On the approaching human fleet, Admiral Paul Green studied the tactical display showing the enormous hegemony armada. Thousands of enemy ships formed a barrier between them and the hegemony homeworld. "They'd gathered quite the welcoming committee," Green remarked calmly. "Is everyone ready for the Thunderbolt protocol?" The bridge crew nodded, their faces serious but determined. Lieutenant Commander Eric Hansen, leader of the Special Operations Teams, stepped forward. "My boarding teams are prepared, Admiral," Hansen reported. "Once we breach their formation, we can deploy to their command ships." Green nodded. "Remember, our goal isn't destruction, but demonstration. We need them to understand they can't win this fight." He opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All ships, prepare for final configuration. Thunderbolt Protocol Alpha." The 17 human vessels began an elaborate dance in space, connecting and combining in ways they had never shown before. The hegemony observers watched with growing concern as the small fleet transformed. Instead of forming 3 or 4 larger ships as in previous encounters, all 17 vessels merged into a single massive structure. The resulting ship was unlike anything seen before, not merely the sum of its parts, but something greater. "What is that?" whispered Zalthir, his confidence faltering. The combined human vessel now rivaled the size of the largest hegemony dreadnoughts. Its hull gleamed with advanced alloys, and energy signatures indicated weapon systems far more powerful than anything the separate ships had displayed. Green opened a communication channel to the Hegemony flagship. "This is Admiral Paul Green of the United Earth Defense Force. We offer you one chance to end this conflict peacefully. Withdraw your forces from the worlds you've subjugated and recognize the independence of all species." Zalthar's scales flashed with anger. "You dare dictate terms to the Hegemony. Your single ship, no matter how impressive, cannot stand against thousands. Then we will demonstrate why you should reconsider," Green replied evenly. The human vessel accelerated toward the Hegemony formation. The front line of enemy ships opened fire, their energy weapons converging on the approaching target. Brilliant shields flared around the human ship, absorbing the barrage without damage. Then it returned fire, not with traditional weapons, but with waves of nanite canisters that spread throughout the Hegemony fleet. Ship after ship lost power as the microscopic machines infiltrated their systems. Weapons went offline. Engines failed. Communications collapsed. In the chaos, smaller craft detached from the main human vessel. These carried Hansen's special operations teams, targeting the Hegemony command ships. They boarded with precision, quickly securing the bridges and capturing key officers. On Zalthar's flagship, emergency alarms blared as systems failed throughout the vessel. The command center doors slid open, revealing Hansen and his team in advanced combat suits. "Supreme Commander Zalthar," Hansen announced, "your ship is under our control. The battle is over." Zalthar stared in disbelief at the human soldiers. "How? How could your tiny fleet defeat us?" Hansen's expression remained professional. "You mistook size for strength. You assumed newer meant better. You never considered that our ships were designed differently because we think differently." Within hours, the mighty Hegemony Grand Armada had been neutralized without a single ship destroyed or life lost. The human vessel maintained position above the Hegemony homeworld as Admiral Green prepared to negotiate peace terms. A new galactic order. The Grand Hall of the Hegemony capital city buzzed with tension. Representatives from over 300 worlds gathered to witness something unprecedented: the signing of a peace treaty that would forever change the structure of galactic civilization. Admiral Paul Green stood at the center of the enormous chamber, flanked by Ambassador Lisa Dawson and Captain Ryan Kelly. Across from them, Supreme Commander Zalthar and the Hegemony Council waited, their once proud postures now subdued. "Today marks the end of one era and the beginning of another," Ambassador Dawson announced, her voice carrying throughout the hall. "The treaty before us establishes the new Galactic Council, where all species will have equal representation and equal rights." Zalthar's scales rippled with barely contained emotion as he signed the document. The mighty Hegemony, which had ruled for 10,000 years, would now be just one voice among many. "You could have destroyed us," Zalthar said quietly to Green after the ceremony. "Your ships controlled our homeworld. Why didn't you?" Green's expression remained calm. "Because that's not who we are. Humans don't seek to dominate, only to live free and help others do the same." In the weeks that followed, the human fleet dispersed throughout former Hegemony space. Their mission changed from war to peacekeeping as newly liberated worlds established their own governments. On the planet Viridian, crowds of blue-skinned locals cheered as human ships arrived bringing medical supplies and technological assistance. Their centuries of servitude had ended because of the species the Hegemony had once mocked. "We never imagined salvation would come from such a distant world," the Viridian leader told Captain Kelly during the welcoming ceremony. "The Hegemony always told us humans were primitive and weak." Kelly smiled. "They confused our approach with weakness. We believe true strength comes from cooperation and innovation, not domination." Back on Earth, military facilities were being transformed. The shipyards that had secretly built the modular fleet now focused on vessels designed for exploration and diplomacy. Admiral Green oversaw the transition, watching with satisfaction as combat modules were replaced with scientific equipment. Quite a change from a few months ago, observed Lieutenant Kate Murphy as she joined Green on the observation deck. "Remember when the hegemony laughed at our tiny fleet?" Green nodded. "It's always dangerous to mistake different for inferior. That was their greatest weakness." In what had once been the hegemony's Central Military Academy, now repurposed as the Galactic Council headquarters, former enemies worked side by side. Species that had been subjugated for generations now sat as equals with their former masters. Dr. Nancy Rivera led a team teaching former hegemony scientists about human technology. "The nanites were just the beginning," she explained to the curious aliens. "We designed them to disable, not destroy, because we valued life above victory." The Valkyrian scientists listened with fascination, their traditional arrogance replaced by genuine interest. One of them, examining a modular ship component, looked up in realization. "Your vessels were designed this way from the beginning," he said. "Even before you met the hegemony, you built ships that could adapt and change." Rivera nodded. "Humanity learned long ago that survival depends on flexibility, not just power." 6 months after the peace treaty, a ceremony took place in Earth orbit. The 17 ships of the original fleet gathered one last time, combining briefly into their most powerful configuration before separating again. "A reminder of what we can become when needed," Admiral Green told the assembled crew members. "But our true strength was never in our weapons. It was in our unwillingness to accept domination and our determination to create a better way." As the ceremony concluded, a hegemony delegation watched from their own vessel. Where once they had laughed at the human ships, they now studied them carefully, finally understanding the lesson they had learned at such cost. Supreme Commander Zolther, now serving as his people's representative to the Galactic Council, gazed at the Earth below. "They appeared so insignificant," he murmured to his aide. "Their fleet so tiny, yet they changed everything." The aide nodded. "Perhaps that is the final lesson of the humans. Never judge by appearance alone." As the human ships dispersed to their new missions of peace, their legacy was secured. Throughout the galaxy, the story spread of how the once mocked, tiny fleet had transformed the stars themselves, replacing 10,000 years of tyranny with the promise of freedom and cooperation for all.